What happened to the Neanderthals? This question, so simple yet profound, echoes through the corridors of human history, reverberating across generations of scientists, anthropologists, and philosophers. The Neanderthals, once a thriving species scattered across vast swaths of Europe and Asia, disappeared from the face of the earth some 40,000 years ago, leaving behind only fragmented bones and mysterious artifacts. Their extinction has long been a source of fascination and speculation. What brought about the end of a species that was so similar to us? Were they outcompeted by Homo sapiens, the ancestors of modern humans? Or did something far more catastrophic seal their fate? The truth remains elusive, hidden in the dust of time, buried in the layers of ancient soil, waiting to be uncovered. The Neanderthals were not some primitive offshoot of humanity, as they were once depicted. They were our closest relatives, sharing 99.7% of our DNA. The traces of their existence are everywhere, hidden in the very fabric of who we are today. They were hunters, gatherers, toolmakers, and perhaps even artists. Their lives were shaped by the same forces that shaped ours, the harsh realities of survival in a brutal Ice Age world, the relentless passage of time, the fierce competition for resources, and the delicate balance of nature. And yet, despite their many similarities to us, they disappeared. What drove them to the brink of extinction? Why did they vanish, leaving us to inherit the earth alone? It is easy to look back at the Neanderthals through the lens of modernity, with our sophisticated tools, cities, and complex societies, and assume that they were somehow less than human. But this perspective fails to capture the full scope of their existence. Neanderthals were fully human, in their own way. Their lives, their struggles, their triumphs and failures, these are all part of the larger story of human evolution. The questions about their disappearance are not just about them, they are about us, and what it means to be human. We begin our exploration in the cold, unforgiving landscapes of Ice Age Europe, where the Neanderthals once roamed. The world they inhabited was vastly different from the world we know today. The planet was in the grip of a frigid ice age, where vast glaciers stretched across the northern hemisphere, and the climate was harsh and unpredictable. The landscape was shaped by ice and snow, forests and tundra, with few natural barriers to impede the movement of animal herds and predators alike. Life for the Neanderthals was a constant struggle for survival. They hunted large game such as mammoths, woolly rhinos, and bison, using sophisticated tools made from stone, bone, and wood. Their lives were centered around small, nomadic groups, constantly moving in search of food, shelter, and safety. Despite the challenges they faced, the Neanderthals were highly skilled and adaptable. Their bodies were built for survival in cold climates, with stocky, muscular frames that allowed them to endure the harsh winters. They had large brains, larger than ours in some cases, which allowed them to develop advanced tools and strategies for hunting and gathering. Their stone tools were finely crafted, demonstrating a level of dexterity and ingenuity that is often attributed solely to Homo sapiens. Some even speculate that Neanderthals may have used fire not just for warmth but for cooking and perhaps even for ritual purposes. Yet, as similar as they were to us, the Neanderthals were also distinct. Their social structures, their ways of communicating, their approach to the world, these were all shaped by the environment in which they lived and the unique challenges they faced. Neanderthals, it seems, had their own culture, their own way of interacting with the world around them. They made art, perhaps not in the way we do, but through symbolic carvings and possibly even body adornment. Some researchers believe that Neanderthals were capable of complex speech, that their vocal cords were as finely tuned as ours. Others argue that their communication was more rudimentary, consisting mainly of gestures and sounds. But whatever the truth may be, there is little doubt that they had the capacity for thought, for emotion, for expression, traits that we often reserve for ourselves alone. The first encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were undoubtedly fraught with tension. We know from genetic evidence that the two species interbred, leaving a genetic legacy that persists in modern humans today. But these interactions were not just about sex, they were about survival. As Homo sapiens began to spread across the globe, they encountered the Neanderthals, and the two species had to compete for resources. It is possible that the more sophisticated social structures and technologies of Homo sapiens gave them an edge in this competition. But the Neanderthals were no pushovers. They were formidable hunters, skilled toolmakers, and resilient survivors. The clash between these two species must have been intense, even if the true nature of their relationship is shrouded in mystery. Was it a slow decline, a gradual fade into oblivion, or was it a sudden catastrophe that wiped out the Neanderthals? The answer is not as simple as we would like it to be. In some ways, the Neanderthals seem to have simply been outcompeted. Homo sapiens were more adaptable, better able to cope with changing climates, and perhaps more socially cohesive. Over time, the Neanderthals may have been pushed to the fringes, forced into smaller and smaller pockets of territory, until they were eventually absorbed into the larger, more successful human population. In this scenario, their extinction was not a violent event but a slow process of assimilation. But there is another possibility, that the Neanderthals' extinction was triggered by a sudden, catastrophic event. The climate at the time was unstable, with rapid fluctuations between ice ages and warmer periods. These shifts could have decimated the populations of Neanderthals, leaving them unable to recover. Disease, too, may have played a role. The arrival of Homo sapiens may have brought new pathogens, to which the Neanderthals had no immunity. Or perhaps a combination of these factors, the changing climate, the spread of disease, and the increasing competition from Homo sapiens, led to the Neanderthals' downfall. Whatever the cause, the result was the same: the Neanderthals disappeared, leaving behind only their bones and a few scattered remnants of their culture. But their legacy is far from forgotten. Today, we know that many of us carry a small part of the Neanderthal within us. Our genes tell the story of a long-lost cousin, a species that was once as real and vibrant as our own. And perhaps that is the most poignant part of the Neanderthal mystery, that they are not truly gone. They live on in us, in the traces of their DNA that have been passed down through the generations. We are not the sole survivors of our evolutionary journey. We are, in some ways, the inheritors of the Neanderthal spirit, the echoes of their lives reverberating through our own. The mystery of their disappearance remains unsolved, but in many ways, the Neanderthals are still with us. Their lives, their struggles, and their fate are part of our own story, woven into the fabric of our shared history. As we continue to uncover new evidence, we may one day come closer to understanding what happened to the Neanderthals, and what their extinction can teach us about our own future. For now, we are left with the question, what happened to the Neanderthals? The answer, it seems, is as elusive as the species itself, forever slipping just out of reach, yet always lingering, waiting to be discovered. The Neanderthals, as they walked across the rugged landscapes of Ice Age Europe, were not solitary creatures. They were part of a broader human-like family, one whose members existed in parallel with early Homo sapiens. In this world, two distinct species of humans coexisted, yet they were not quite like the modern human societies we know today. Their lives were shaped by the same primal need to survive, to find food, shelter, and security. Yet, their ways of doing so were remarkably different, even as they shared many traits. The Neanderthals' existence alongside early humans presents a fascinating narrative, one that speaks to the tensions, competition, and occasional cooperation between two groups of beings who were both so alike and yet so different. To understand the relationship between the Neanderthals and the early Homo sapiens, it's essential to first grasp what the world they inhabited was like. The Earth, at this time, was in the grip of a great ice age, a period marked by freezing temperatures, massive glaciers, and a fluctuating landscape that could either nurture or destroy life. The land was wild, unpredictable, and often treacherous, with dense forests, vast plains, and towering mountains. For the Neanderthals, survival was a constant battle against the elements, the animals they hunted, and, in some cases, other human groups. Yet, despite the harshness of the environment, they were remarkably adapted to it. Their bodies were built for strength and endurance, with stocky frames and powerful muscles that allowed them to endure the freezing winters and hunt large prey in the icy wilderness. Neanderthal life was centered around small groups, family units that moved from one hunting ground to the next in search of food. These groups were nomadic, their movements dictated by the availability of game and the changing seasons. It is likely that Neanderthals lived in close-knit, tightly bonded social groups, as survival in such a challenging environment would have required cooperation and shared responsibility. Each member of the group played a role, whether it was hunting, foraging, protecting the young, or gathering resources. Tools, fashioned from stone, bone, and wood, were central to their daily existence. These were not crude implements, as they were once thought to be. Rather, the tools crafted by Neanderthals were sophisticated and highly specialized, demonstrating a level of technical skill and foresight that belied their often simplistic reputation. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, were a more versatile species, capable of not only adapting to different environments but also of altering them to suit their needs. Early humans were inventive, developing new ways to communicate, organize, and create. They, too, relied on tools, but their use of these tools was often more varied and complex. Homo sapiens were social creatures as well, but they tended to form larger, more flexible groups, capable of long-distance migration and far-reaching trade. Their ability to create more intricate social structures and their capacity for abstract thought, evidenced by art, ritual, and more advanced communication, set them apart from their Neanderthal counterparts. The early humans were not just survivors, they were innovators. As these two species shared the same environment, they would have encountered each other. It's impossible to know exactly how their interactions unfolded, but archaeological evidence suggests a complex relationship. Did they compete for resources, or did they coexist peacefully? Were there moments of conflict, as each species sought to dominate the same territories, or were there instances of collaboration? The answer is likely a mix of both. There is evidence that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred, leaving behind traces of Neanderthal DNA in the genomes of modern humans. This suggests that there was at least some level of interaction, perhaps even cooperation, between the two species. Yet, competition was inevitable. Homo sapiens, with their more advanced tools, their ability to communicate more effectively, and their social organization, likely had an advantage in the struggle for survival. As the climate shifted and the ice age progressed, it is possible that Homo sapiens, with their greater adaptability, were better able to cope with the changing environment. Neanderthals, while highly specialized for the cold, may have struggled to keep pace with the rapid changes brought about by climate fluctuations. The Neanderthals' limited range of tools and their reliance on a smaller social network might have made them less resilient in the face of these challenges. Despite these challenges, the Neanderthals were not without their own strengths. They were formidable hunters, relying on close-range weapons and well-developed strategies to take down large animals. Some evidence suggests that Neanderthals hunted in groups, coordinating their efforts to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Their physical strength, combined with their hunting techniques, made them capable of surviving in one of the harshest climates Earth has ever known. Their stone tools were not just simple instruments, they were highly specialized and effective. Neanderthal flint tools, for example, were used for cutting, scraping, and butchering large animals, and their spears were capable of taking down mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses. The question of whether Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived in harmony or conflict is still debated among scientists. Some scholars suggest that the two species had a kind of mutual coexistence, with each contributing to the other's survival in subtle ways. Perhaps early humans learned hunting techniques from the Neanderthals, or maybe Neanderthals adopted certain tools or practices from Homo sapiens. This exchange of knowledge could have been one of the key factors that allowed both species to survive in the volatile world of the Ice Age. In fact, recent discoveries suggest that Neanderthals may have had more in common with Homo sapiens than we once thought. They lived in complex social groups, used symbolic language, and even engaged in practices that suggest an early form of spirituality. On the other hand, the possibility of conflict between the two species cannot be ruled out. Competition for resources would have been inevitable, especially as the Ice Age gave way to warmer periods and new challenges arose. Homo sapiens, with their superior social organization and technology, may have eventually overwhelmed the Neanderthals. It is also possible that the arrival of Homo sapiens brought diseases to which the Neanderthals had no immunity, further diminishing their chances of survival. The interaction between these two human species was likely not a peaceful one, but rather a mixture of competition, assimilation, and survival. The most enduring question surrounding the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens is whether the Neanderthals' extinction was a result of direct competition or whether it was simply a case of the Neanderthals being unable to adapt to the rapidly changing world around them. The climate at the time was shifting dramatically. With the end of the Ice Age came warmer temperatures, rising sea levels, and changing ecosystems. These environmental changes may have altered the habitats that Neanderthals relied on, making it harder for them to find food and shelter. Homo sapiens, with their greater adaptability and ability to change with the environment, may have been better equipped to cope with these shifts. But the Neanderthals did not vanish immediately. For thousands of years, they and Homo sapiens coexisted, sometimes in the same regions, sometimes in different parts of the world. The Neanderthals did not disappear overnight, they were gradually absorbed, pushed out, or outcompete. There may have been some instances of violence, of battles for territory, but there were also moments of interaction, of peaceful cohabitation, and of mutual influence. In the end, Homo sapiens emerged as the dominant species, but the Neanderthals left their mark on humanity. Their genes live on in us, a reminder that we were not alone in this world, that we shared it with others who were as much a part of our story as we are. The disappearance of the Neanderthals is a complex, multifaceted mystery that is still being unraveled. Were they wiped out by Homo sapiens, or did they simply fade into extinction due to environmental changes? The truth is likely a combination of both. The Neanderthals, once a powerful and resilient species, were ultimately outcompeted by Homo sapiens, but they were not erased. They live on in us, not just in the remnants of their DNA, but in the very essence of what it means to be human. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, may have claimed the earth, but the Neanderthals are not forgotten. Their legacy endures, a silent echo of a world long past. The Neanderthals, our closest ancient relatives, were a species of human that existed across Europe and parts of Asia for thousands of years. Yet, despite their proximity to us in both time and genetics, much about their physical makeup remains a subject of intense fascination. What did they look like? How did their bodies evolve to survive in such a harsh and unforgiving environment? The Neanderthal body was uniquely adapted to the Ice Age world they inhabited, shaped by thousands of years of natural selection and environmental pressures. Their robust frame, thick bones, and powerful musculature gave them an advantage in the extreme conditions of the Pleistocene epoch, yet they were also different from modern humans in ways that still intrigue scientists today. To fully understand the Neanderthals, we must first explore the physical features that set them apart from us, and in doing so, we come closer to understanding the remarkable ways in which they thrived and ultimately disappeared. The first thing that strikes you about a Neanderthal is their sheer size and strength. The Neanderthal body was built for survival in the cold, harsh climates of Ice Age Europe, and their physicality reflected this. They were stocky, with broad, muscular frames that helped them conserve heat in a world covered in ice and snow. Their limbs were shorter and more robust than those of modern humans, designed to minimize heat loss and maximize energy efficiency in an environment where the temperature could plummet to extreme lows. This body type, known as cold-adapted, was a key factor in their survival. Neanderthals were powerful, with thicker bones and more developed muscles than we have today, built for endurance and the physical demands of hunting large prey, such as mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses. They had strong, sturdy arms and legs, perfect for throwing spears or wielding heavy tools. Their overall body mass was greater than ours, too, with some Neanderthals weighing between 160 and 200 pounds, depending on their height and muscle mass. This bulkiness gave them the physical strength to endure tough conditions, but it also meant that they were much less agile than Homo sapiens. This difference in agility likely affected their hunting strategies, with Neanderthals relying more on strength and direct confrontation with prey rather than the endurance and flexibility that early humans used in their hunts. But this wasn't just a matter of size. The Neanderthal body was adapted to the demands of a cold world in a variety of ways. Their skulls were large and heavy, with a pronounced brow ridge that jutted out over the eyes, and their faces were long and flat, a stark contrast to the more rounded features of modern humans. Their noses were large and wide, a characteristic that likely helped them warm the cold air they breathed in such frigid temperatures. The size of their nasal cavity suggests that Neanderthals had a heightened sense of smell, which would have been crucial for tracking animals across vast, frozen landscapes. Their skulls housed brains that were, on average, as large as those of modern humans, and in some cases, even larger. However, the structure of their brains was slightly different, with less of the brain dedicated to the areas associated with abstract thinking and more focused on motor functions, suggesting that Neanderthals were deeply rooted in practical, survival-oriented thought. The body of a Neanderthal, despite its many differences from ours, also had many similarities. Their hands, for example, were almost identical to ours, capable of fine manipulation and the creation of intricate tools. Their ability to craft stone tools and weapons was crucial to their survival and sets them apart from many other extinct species. The Neanderthal thumb was particularly strong, suggesting that they were adept at creating tools that required precision and strength. Evidence shows that Neanderthals were capable of using their tools not only for hunting and butchering animals but also for building shelter and even creating art. The sharpness and specialization of their tools indicate a high level of cognitive function, supporting the theory that their larger brains were used for problem-solving and advanced thought in a way that went beyond mere survival instincts. Their teeth, too, were unlike those of modern humans. Neanderthal teeth were larger and more robust, designed to handle the tough, fibrous diets they consumed. Their molars were powerful tools for grinding up plant material, while their incisors were used for cutting meat or perhaps processing hides. Neanderthal dental wear patterns suggest that they ate a diet high in meat, as evidenced by the numerous animal bones and remains found at their archaeological sites. The fact that they had such strong, durable teeth was a testament to their reliance on raw, unprocessed food. However, this also meant that their diets were harsh on their teeth, and many Neanderthals suffered from dental wear and tooth loss by the time they reached adulthood. But what truly sets the Neanderthals apart from modern humans is not just their physical features, it is the way their bodies were tailored to endure the environmental hardships they faced. Neanderthals, it seems, were designed for a life of struggle, where survival was never guaranteed. In addition to their stocky, powerful frames, they had thick, protective skin and a layer of subcutaneous fat that helped insulate them against the cold. Their metabolic rates were higher than those of modern humans, suggesting that their bodies worked harder to generate heat and sustain their energy in a world where food could be scarce. Yet, despite these impressive physical adaptations, Neanderthals were not without their vulnerabilities. Their shorter, stockier limbs made them less agile than modern humans, and their larger bodies required more food to sustain themselves. This would have been a major challenge during times of scarcity, especially as the climate shifted and hunting became more difficult. Furthermore, their relatively small social groups may have hindered their ability to share resources and adapt quickly to changes in their environment, such as climate fluctuations and the appearance of new predators. The question of whether Neanderthals were primitive or advanced is a central one in the study of their physical attributes. For a long time, the prevailing view was that Neanderthals were an evolutionary dead end, a brutish species whose physical attributes were far from the grace and agility of modern humans. However, new research has painted a different picture. Neanderthals, while distinct in their appearance and behavior, were not the simple, uncivilized creatures once thought to be inferior to early humans. They were highly specialized for survival in their specific environments, and their physical form was a direct response to the challenges of the Ice Age. This growing recognition of the Neanderthals' physical and cultural complexity has sparked a renewed interest in their legacy. In recent years, researchers have begun to reconsider their place in the broader story of human evolution. Neanderthals were not just a footnote in the history of humanity, they were a vital part of the human family, whose physical and intellectual achievements rivaled those of early Homo sapiens. They were resilient, capable, and adaptive, even if their bodies were more robust and their lifestyles more focused on immediate survival than on the long-term planning and innovation of modern humans. In a sense, the Neanderthals' physical makeup speaks to the deeper philosophical question of what it means to be human. Their powerful, stocky bodies were perfectly adapted to the harshness of their environment, yet they were also capable of art, communication, and culture. Their physical differences from modern humans serve as a reminder that the human story is not linear. Evolution is not a simple progression from primitive to advanced, but rather a complex web of interrelated developments, each species adapting in its own way to the challenges it faced. The Neanderthals, in their strength and endurance, represent one branch of this complex tree, and understanding their physical attributes is key to understanding the remarkable beings they were. In the end, the Neanderthals were not merely a species of humans whose physical features set them apart. Their bodies tell a story of adaptation, resilience, and survival in an unforgiving world. They were creatures of strength, capable of great feats, and yet, in the end, their bodies, like all bodies, were subject to the forces of time and change. But in the bones they left behind, in the traces of their lives and their bodies, we find echoes of their existence. They may be gone, but in our understanding of their physical form, we catch a glimpse of the extraordinary creatures they once were. The story of the Neanderthals is not just one of survival, it is a story of innovation, culture, and the development of tools that were essential to their existence. In the cold, harsh world of Ice Age Europe, the Neanderthals were not mere hunters and gatherers, they were creators, problem solvers, and makers of objects that were crucial to their daily lives. The tools they crafted, stone, bone, wood, served many purposes: to hunt, to process food, to build shelter, and perhaps even to express their creativity. These tools are not just remnants of a lost past, but a window into the minds of a species that, for all their differences from modern humans, shared with us the drive to shape the world around them. To understand the Neanderthal way of life, we must first look at the tools they used. The technology of the Neanderthals, though sometimes considered rudimentary compared to modern standards, was highly specialized for the environment they inhabited. The stone tools they left behind are not just primitive implements, they are evidence of a complex, organized culture that required skill, foresight, and cooperation. Among the most famous tools found in Neanderthal sites are the Mysterian tools, a distinctive collection of flint implements that were expertly shaped for a variety of tasks. These tools, scrapers, knives, hand axes, were designed with specific purposes in mind, demonstrating that Neanderthals had a deep understanding of their environment and the materials they worked with. The Mysterian tool industry was based on a technique called levallois, a method of preparing a core of stone from which flakes could be struck to create sharp-edged tools. This technique required great skill and knowledge of material properties. The tools were not simply made for immediate utility but were crafted with a long-term understanding of their functions. A well-made scraper, for example, could be used to process animal hides or clean meat from bones. A hand axe, with its sturdy, pointed edge, could be used to chop wood or break open bones to access marrow. These tools were essential for survival in the challenging environment of the Ice Age, where every day required ingenuity and adaptation. Neanderthals were not only toolmakers but also tool users who demonstrated remarkable skill in their execution. Evidence shows that they could craft tools that were not just functional, but refined. The precision of their flint knapping techniques, which involved striking stone with other hard materials to create sharp edges, speaks to a deep understanding of the materials they worked with. The care and expertise needed to create such tools suggest that the Neanderthals were not simply acting out of instinct, they were making deliberate choices, honing skills over generations. The quality of the tools they produced is a testament to their cognitive abilities, and it challenges the once prevailing notion that Neanderthals were primitive and lacking in intellect. In addition to stone tools, Neanderthals also used bone and wood to create implements. Bone tools, such as awls and points, were often used in conjunction with their stone tools. These materials were durable and could be shaped into specialized instruments for a range of tasks, from preparing hides to crafting clothing. There is also evidence to suggest that Neanderthals used wooden spears to hunt large game, though the exact methods of hunting remain a subject of debate. These weapons, like their stone tools, were created with care and precision. Wooden spears have been found at Neanderthal archaeological sites, sometimes with evidence of hafting, attaching a stone point to a wooden shaft to create a more effective weapon. This innovation shows that Neanderthals were not simply reliant on stone tools, but were also capable of adapting their materials to fit different needs. One of the most striking aspects of Neanderthal tool use is the evidence of symbolic behavior associated with some of their tools. While early scholars often dismissed the idea of Neanderthals engaging in symbolic thinking, recent discoveries have revealed that they were capable of creating art and objects with symbolic meaning. In caves across Europe, archaeologists have found objects that suggest Neanderthals engaged in activities that went beyond mere survival. Shells, animal teeth, and bones have been found perforated or engraved in ways that suggest they were used as adornments, necklaces, or other forms of personal decoration. These items, which appear to have been deliberately altered, indicate that Neanderthals had some capacity for symbolic thought and personal expression, suggesting that they may have had beliefs or customs that were not purely functional. In one of the most significant discoveries, archaeologists found a series of cave paintings in Spain that appear to have been created by Neanderthals. These paintings, which include hand stencils and geometric shapes, challenge the old idea that only Homo sapiens were capable of creating art. If the paintings were indeed made by Neanderthals, they suggest that these ancient humans had a rich inner life, capable of creating abstract symbols and expressing themselves visually. Such discoveries force us to reconsider the cultural and intellectual abilities of the Neanderthals. The notion that Neanderthals were incapable of complex thought and expression is being increasingly challenged by evidence of their creativity, as well as their ability to pass down knowledge through generations. But it wasn't just objects that the Neanderthals crafted, it was the way they used these tools in their daily lives that reveals a deeper level of cultural sophistication. Neanderthal sites often show evidence of organized, communal living. They constructed shelters, built fires, and engaged in complex social behaviors that suggest a level of cooperation and social interaction. The remains of hearths and fire pits at Neanderthal sites show that they were not only able to create fire but also to use it for cooking, warmth, and possibly even social gatherings. The use of fire was a critical innovation that allowed Neanderthals to survive in the extreme cold of the Ice Age. Cooking would have made food more digestible and nutritious, and the warmth provided by fire would have been essential for survival during the long, freezing winters. The social structure of Neanderthal groups is still the subject of much debate. While evidence points to tight-knit groups of individuals working together to hunt and gather, it's unclear just how these groups were organized. Some researchers believe that Neanderthal societies were small and family-based, while others suggest that they may have been more fluid, with individuals coming together for specific tasks or during seasonal migrations. What is clear, however, is that Neanderthals were not solitary creatures. They needed each other to survive, and their survival depended on a degree of cooperation and sharing. This cooperation is reflected in the tools and artifacts found at Neanderthal sites. Tools were often made collectively, with members of the group working together to create the implements necessary for survival. The distribution of tools at Neanderthal sites also suggests that they were shared among group members, perhaps passed down from older generations to younger ones. This transmission of knowledge points to a culture of learning and teaching, where survival skills were passed on, honed, and refined over time. Despite these impressive cultural achievements, it's important to note that the Neanderthals' tools and artifacts were not as varied or sophisticated as those of Homo sapiens. Neanderthal technology remained largely focused on the practicalities of survival, tools for hunting, food preparation, shelter construction. The broader, more abstract forms of art and innovation that characterized early Homo sapiens were largely absent from Neanderthal culture. While the Neanderthals were certainly capable of symbolic thinking and creativity, they did not develop the same complex societal structures or artistic expressions that Homo sapiens did. This difference in cultural development may have played a role in their eventual extinction. Homo sapiens, with their greater capacity for abstract thought, complex social organization, and innovation, may have had the edge in a rapidly changing world. The tools of the Neanderthals provide a fascinating glimpse into their daily lives and the way they interacted with the world around them. Far from being primitive, Neanderthal tools were highly specialized and essential to their survival. They reflect not only the practical needs of a species living in an unforgiving environment but also the intelligence, adaptability, and creativity that defined the Neanderthal way of life. These tools, though simple by modern standards, were the result of countless generations of refinement and skill. And in their creation, the Neanderthals left behind a legacy, one that is still being discovered, one that tells us that they were not just survivors, but creators in their own right. The question of whether Neanderthals were capable of language is one that has intrigued scientists for decades. Language, in many ways, is considered the defining trait of what makes us human. It shapes how we communicate, how we think, and how we relate to the world around us. For a long time, it was assumed that Neanderthals, despite their many human-like qualities, lacked the ability to speak in the sophisticated ways that Homo sapiens can. But recent advances in genetics, anatomy, and archaeology are challenging this assumption. Could it be that the Neanderthals, our closest relatives, were capable of a complex language, one that allowed them to share ideas, emotions, and even abstract concepts? The evidence is emerging, suggesting that Neanderthals may have had a capacity for language that was far more advanced than we ever imagined. The first clue that Neanderthals may have had language comes from the structure of their brains and vocal apparatus. Neuroimaging studies of modern humans have shown that certain areas of the brain are specifically dedicated to language processing, such as Broca's area, which is responsible for speech production, and Wernicke's area, which is involved in understanding speech. When scientists examined the fossilized remains of Neanderthal skulls, they found that their brain cases were not radically different from those of modern humans. In fact, some researchers believe that the size and structure of the Neanderthal brain, especially in the areas associated with speech and social cognition, were very similar to that of Homo sapiens. This has led to the hypothesis that Neanderthals may have had the neural circuits necessary for language, even if the complexity of their language was not identical to that of modern humans. Additionally, recent studies of the hyoid bone, a small bone in the neck that supports the tongue and is critical for speech production, have provided further insights into Neanderthal speech capabilities. Fossils of the Neanderthal hyoid bone have been found, and they appear to be quite similar to those of modern humans. This suggests that Neanderthals were capable of making a wide range of vocal sounds, a necessary condition for speech. In modern humans, the shape and position of the hyoid bone are essential for the articulation of words and the complex sounds that make up language. The fact that the Neanderthal hyoid was structurally similar implies that they could produce speech, albeit likely with some differences in tone or range compared to Homo sapiens. However, while the anatomical evidence strongly suggests that Neanderthals were capable of speech, there is still the question of how advanced their language was. Did they have a fully developed system of communication, capable of conveying abstract ideas, emotions, and complex social information? Or was their language more primitive, based on gestures and simple sounds, like those of some modern primates? The truth, as is often the case with prehistoric humans, is likely somewhere in between. Neanderthals may not have had the same nuanced, abstract language that we do today, but they likely had a system of vocalization and gestures that allowed them to convey essential information about their environment, their social relationships, and their survival strategies. Archaeological evidence also suggests that Neanderthals may have engaged in symbolic communication, which is often considered a precursor to language. Objects such as animal teeth, shells, and bones have been found at Neanderthal sites, sometimes modified in ways that suggest they were used for decoration or personal adornment. These items, which appear to have been intentionally altered, could have been used to signal status, identity, or group affiliation, concepts that are often communicated through language in human societies. The presence of such symbolic objects suggests that Neanderthals were capable of creating and understanding symbols, which is a critical component of language. Moreover, Neanderthals are known to have lived in social groups, and there is strong evidence that they cooperated in hunting, gathering, and child-rearing. For such cooperative behavior to take place, a system of communication would have been necessary. It is likely that Neanderthals used both vocalizations and body language, gestures, facial expressions, and posture, to communicate with one another. While we may never know the full extent of their language, it seems plausible that Neanderthals could have used speech in combination with these other forms of communication to convey meaning. The complexity of Neanderthal social structures also suggests that they may have had a more sophisticated language than we typically assume. Neanderthals lived in small, close-knit groups that required cooperation for survival. They hunted large game, built shelters, and cared for their young, all of which necessitated communication. Neanderthal families likely shared food, protected one another from predators, and helped each other during difficult times. In order to maintain these cooperative relationships, a means of communication would have been essential. Language, even in its most rudimentary form, would have allowed Neanderthals to coordinate their efforts, express emotions, and establish social bonds. The question of whether Neanderthals had language also ties into the broader question of their cognitive abilities. For much of the 20th century, Neanderthals were considered to be cognitively inferior to Homo sapiens. They were often depicted as brutish, primitive creatures with limited intellectual capacity. However, this view has been increasingly challenged by new research. Neanderthals were capable of creating and using sophisticated tools, making fire, hunting large animals, and even creating art. These accomplishments suggest that they possessed a high level of intelligence, perhaps not identical to that of modern humans, but still impressive in its own right. Language, as one of the highest forms of human cognition, would have been an integral part of this intelligence. Some researchers argue that Neanderthal language may have been different from ours, shaped by their unique cognitive and social structure. For instance, their social groups may have been smaller and more tightly knit than those of Homo sapiens, which could have influenced the way they communicated. Perhaps their language was more focused on immediate, practical concerns, sharing information about food, shelter, or danger, rather than the abstract concepts that Homo sapiens language is capable of conveying. This doesn't mean that Neanderthal language was simple or lacking in complexity. On the contrary, it may have been highly effective for their needs, allowing them to coordinate in their daily lives, maintain social bonds, and navigate the challenges of their environment. One of the most compelling arguments for the presence of Neanderthal language is the fact that they were capable of learning. Neanderthals were not born with an innate knowledge of survival, they had to learn the skills necessary to live in their environment, such as how to make tools, hunt, and process food. This learning process would have required communication, both verbal and nonverbal. The ability to teach and learn from one another is a critical aspect of language, and it suggests that Neanderthals had the cognitive capacity for more complex communication than previously thought. The idea that Neanderthals had language also raises broader questions about the nature of human evolution. If Neanderthals were capable of language, what does this mean for our understanding of human uniqueness? For a long time, language was considered the hallmark of Homo sapiens, the trait that set us apart from other animals. But if Neanderthals had language, this challenges the notion of a clear line between us and them. The gap between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, once thought to be vast, appears to have been narrower than we imagined. We share so much with the Neanderthals: language, tools, art, and social complexity, and these similarities force us to reconsider what it means to be human. As we look back at the Neanderthals, it is becoming clear that they were not the simple, brutish creatures once depicted in textbooks. They were complex, intelligent beings who were capable of creating and sharing knowledge, just like us. Their ability to communicate, both verbally and through other means, was an essential part of their survival. Though their language may have been different from ours, it was no less powerful, no less important. The more we learn about the Neanderthals, the more we realize that they were not just our ancestors' cousins, they were a vital part of the human story, and their legacy continues to shape our understanding of what it means to be human. The extinction of the Neanderthals is one of the most enduring mysteries of human prehistory, a question that has captivated archaeologists, anthropologists, and evolutionary biologists for generations. What happened to these close relatives of ours who once thrived in the harsh conditions of Ice Age Europe? Why did they disappear, leaving Homo sapiens as the only surviving species of human in the world? The conventional narrative once held that the Neanderthals were simply outcompeted by modern humans, their genetic legacy absorbed by our own species through occasional interbreeding, their culture and way of life overwhelmed by the technological and social advantages of Homo sapiens. Yet, this explanation now seems overly simplistic. New research, genetic evidence, and evolving theories suggest that the fate of the Neanderthals may have been more complex, shaped not just by competition, but by a variety of environmental, social, and even biological factors. The end of the Neanderthal line, once seen as a straightforward case of extinction, is now understood to have been a far more intricate process, one that may have been as much about adaptation and survival as it was about downfall. To begin to understand why the Neanderthals disappeared, we must first consider the world they inhabited. The Neanderthals lived during one of the most tumultuous periods in Earth's history, the Pleistocene epoch, marked by dramatic climate shifts, the advance and retreat of glaciers, and fluctuating ecosystems. Europe, where the Neanderthals lived, was a frozen wasteland for much of their existence, with glaciers covering vast expanses of land and temperatures dropping to uninhabitable lows. Yet, despite these extreme conditions, the Neanderthals thrived. They were highly adapted to their environment, with their stocky bodies and robust physiology designed to retain heat and withstand the cold. Their large brains and strong muscles helped them hunt large game, including mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and other megafauna that roamed the icy landscape. But by around 40,000 years ago, something began to change. The world was warming, and the Ice Age was coming to an end. This shift in climate had profound effects on the environment. Glaciers began to retreat, and the once frozen land of Europe slowly transformed into a landscape of forests, grasslands, and changing ecosystems. As the climate warmed, the megafauna that the Neanderthals depended on for food began to vanish, either due to hunting pressures, environmental changes, or a combination of both. This loss of large game would have had a devastating impact on the Neanderthals' ability to hunt and feed themselves. At the same time, Homo sapiens were moving into Europe. Modern humans had already been in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years, but by around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began to migrate out of Africa and into Asia and Europe. Unlike the Neanderthals, who had evolved to thrive in the cold, early Homo sapiens were highly adaptable, able to survive in a variety of environments. They had more advanced tools, more sophisticated social structures, and were capable of longer-distance migration. Homo sapiens also had a broader diet, which included not just large game, but also smaller animals, plants, and fish. This dietary flexibility may have given them a significant advantage in a world where the environment was changing rapidly. The arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe likely created direct competition for resources. The two species may have competed for the same hunting grounds, the same food sources, and the same shelter. Evidence suggests that the Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens interacted in various ways, sometimes coexisting peacefully, but more often than not, clashing over territory and resources. Homo sapiens, with their superior toolkits and more complex social structures, likely had the upper hand in these encounters. Neanderthals, with their more limited social organization and specialized tool usage, may have struggled to keep up with the rapidly changing world around them. Yet, it wasn't just direct competition for resources that contributed to the Neanderthal extinction. One of the more compelling theories is that Homo sapiens may have brought diseases with them, to which the Neanderthals had no immunity. When modern humans migrated into Europe, they carried with them not just their culture and technology, but also the pathogens that had co-evolved with them in Africa. Neanderthals, isolated from other human populations for thousands of years, had no prior exposure to these diseases. This lack of immunity could have made them highly vulnerable to epidemics, resulting in significant population declines. The arrival of Homo sapiens may have also introduced new social dynamics that the Neanderthals were ill-equipped to handle. Homo sapiens had more complex social structures, perhaps larger and more interconnected groups, which allowed them to share resources, knowledge, and strategies more effectively. These social advantages likely allowed Homo sapiens to outlast the Neanderthals in times of hardship, as larger, more cooperative groups would have been better equipped to face environmental changes and food shortages. By contrast, the smaller, more isolated groups of Neanderthals may have struggled to adapt to these new challenges. But even as Homo sapiens moved into Neanderthal territory and began to outcompete them, the relationship between the two species may not have been purely antagonistic. Evidence suggests that the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens occasionally interbred, contributing to the genetic diversity of modern humans. Today, we know that non-African populations carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, around 1 to 2, with some populations, like those of European descent, carrying slightly higher percentages. This genetic evidence points to the possibility that the two species did not simply compete or displace one another, but rather, interacted in ways that included interbreeding. Neanderthals, it seems, may have left a genetic legacy in our DNA, even if they eventually disappeared as a distinct species. The process of Neanderthal extinction was likely gradual, not a sudden event. Their population may have dwindled over thousands of years due to a combination of factors: environmental changes, competition with Homo sapiens, disease, and possibly even internal social stresses. As the climate warmed and their primary food sources became scarce, Neanderthals may have found it increasingly difficult to maintain their way of life. Their reliance on large-game hunting and specialized tools may have been less effective in the new, more diverse ecosystems that emerged after the Ice Age. Homo sapiens, with their greater adaptability, could have fared better in the face of these changes, while the Neanderthals struggled to cope. Some researchers have suggested that the Neanderthals may have been absorbed into the expanding Homo sapiens populations through a process of cultural assimilation rather than direct extermination. This view suggests that rather than being wiped out entirely by Homo sapiens, the Neanderthals gradually blended into the growing populations of modern humans. Over time, the genetic, cultural, and social distinctions between the two species may have blurred, until the Neanderthals were no longer a distinct group. This theory is supported by the genetic evidence, which shows that modern humans carry traces of Neanderthal DNA. While the Neanderthals may have vanished as a separate species, they did not disappear completely. The question of why the Neanderthals went extinct is not just a matter of scientific curiosity. It has profound implications for how we think about human evolution and the survival of species. The Neanderthals were not a failed branch of the human family tree. They were a species that survived for hundreds of thousands of years, adapting to one of the most hostile environments Earth has ever seen. Their extinction was not inevitable, it was the result of a complex set of factors, some of which were beyond their control. And in their disappearance, we are left with a legacy, a reminder that the survival of any species is never guaranteed. The Neanderthals were not simply erased from the earth, they were absorbed, they were changed, and their influence remains in us. Today, when we speak of the Neanderthals, we are not speaking of a ghost of the past, but of a lineage that lives on in our genes, in our behavior, and in our understanding of what it means to be human. The Neanderthals' relationship with modern humans is far more complicated than a simple story of competition and replacement. For decades, the prevailing narrative was that Homo sapiens emerged from Africa and eventually overwhelmed and replaced the Neanderthal populations through a combination of better technology, more advanced social structures, and sheer numbers. Neanderthals were thought to have been driven to extinction by the superior Homo sapiens, their genetic line extinguished, their way of life swept away. However, the truth is more nuanced. The Neanderthals did not just vanish into oblivion. Instead, their legacy continues to linger in our DNA, in the structure of our genomes, and in the very fabric of who we are as humans. It is now understood that the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens was not one of total displacement but one of intermingling and shared survival. The realization that modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA has fundamentally altered our understanding of human evolution. It's no longer accurate to think of the Neanderthals as an entirely separate or distinct branch of humanity, isolated from our ancestors. Instead, they were part of the same complex tree of human evolution, and their genetic contributions are still present in the genomes of many people alive today. The key discovery came from the sequencing of the Neanderthal genome, a groundbreaking scientific achievement that provided deep insight into our shared genetic history. This research revealed that, while Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were distinct species, they did not remain entirely separate. Instead, they interacted, coexisted, and, perhaps most remarkably, interbred. The genetic evidence shows that Neanderthals and modern humans share a common ancestor that lived approximately 500,000 years ago. However, as Homo sapiens began their migration out of Africa, they encountered Neanderthal populations living in Europe and Asia. Over thousands of years, these two species came into contact, and genetic exchange took place. The extent of this interbreeding was a surprise to many scientists, who once believed that the Neanderthals were entirely replaced by Homo sapiens. In fact, about 1 to 2% of the DNA of modern non-African populations comes from Neanderthals, evidence of the intimate genetic link between the two species. This revelation also changed the way we think about the out of Africa theory, which posited that Homo sapiens spread from Africa and completely replaced other hominin species, including the Neanderthals, without interbreeding. Instead, it seems that the dispersal of Homo sapiens was far more complex. Rather than a clear-cut replacement, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals coexisted in overlapping regions for thousands of years, exchanging genetic material and, in some cases, perhaps even learning from each other. This genetic legacy, present in our DNA today, is a testament to the profound and complex relationship between these two human species. While much of the evidence points to a limited amount of interbreeding, the impact of Neanderthal genes on modern humans is substantial in ways that were once unimaginable. These genetic traces have been linked to a variety of traits in modern humans, from immune system responses to skin color, and even some aspects of our behavior. For example, Neanderthal DNA has been associated with a variety of health conditions, including susceptibility to certain diseases such as type 2 diabetes, Crohn's disease, and various autoimmune disorders. On the other hand, some of the Neanderthal genes may have been advantageous, offering protection against specific pathogens that were prevalent at the time. In essence, Neanderthal DNA has been preserved in human populations over tens of thousands of years, becoming a part of the broader human genetic pool. Furthermore, Neanderthal genes have been linked to traits like hair and skin color, as well as the ability to adapt to various environments. Research has suggested that Neanderthals contributed to the lighter skin pigmentation of modern Europeans, a trait that helped their descendants cope with the lower levels of sunlight in Europe. This adaptation is thought to have enabled them to produce more vitamin D in the skin, which is vital in environments where sunlight is scarce during the winter months. Neanderthal DNA may have also contributed to other physiological traits, such as metabolic adaptations, and possibly even the way modern humans process oxygen in high altitudes, as seen in some populations of Tibetans and other high-altitude groups. Yet, the genetic legacy of Neanderthals is not just a matter of physical traits. Research is also revealing how Neanderthal genes might have influenced the cognitive and psychological traits of modern humans. Some studies suggest that certain aspects of our intelligence, memory, and even mood could be traced back to these ancient interactions. For instance, some Neanderthal genes are linked to the regulation of serotonin, a neurotransmitter involved in mood regulation. While this does not suggest that Neanderthal DNA controls our emotions in any direct way, it hints at a more subtle influence on our mental and emotional lives. Interestingly, the question of Neanderthal contributions to language has also been the subject of recent studies. It appears that some of the genes associated with language and speech in modern humans may also have Neanderthal origins. For example, a gene called FOXP2, which is linked to the ability to produce speech sounds and form language, is found in both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. While the precise role of this gene is still being studied, its presence in both species suggests that the Neanderthals may have had at least some form of language, one that may have been far more complex than previously imagined. However, the story of Neanderthal genes is not just about survival and adaptation. The genetic evidence has also led to a deeper understanding of the extinction of the Neanderthals themselves. It seems that, despite their contributions to our genetic makeup, the Neanderthals were eventually absorbed into the Homo sapiens gene pool over time. Rather than a sudden extinction or violent displacement, their genetic line was slowly diluted as interbreeding with modern humans continued. The genetic contributions of the Neanderthals persisted, but the Neanderthals as a distinct species faded away. This process of assimilation may have been gradual, taking thousands of years, and may have involved periods of isolation and decline in Neanderthal populations, making them increasingly vulnerable to competition, climate change, and other challenges. The concept of genetic assimilation challenges the traditional view of extinction as a total erasure of a species. Instead, it suggests that the Neanderthals were not so much wiped out by Homo sapiens but were absorbed into the genetic legacy of modern humans. This idea has profound implications for how we think about species survival and extinction in the broader context of evolution. It calls into question the sharp distinctions often drawn between different species, suggesting that in many cases, species boundaries are not as rigid as we once believed. The legacy of the Neanderthals is more than just a matter of genetic inheritance. The interaction between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens left a lasting mark on human culture and society. As we continue to unravel the genetic and archaeological evidence, it becomes increasingly clear that the Neanderthals were not simply a footnote in the story of human evolution. Their influence is deeply embedded in our DNA, in our physical traits, and even in the way we think, feel, and interact with one another. Through the study of Neanderthal genetics, we are beginning to understand just how much of a role they played in shaping the modern human experience. The relationship between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals is not just a tale of competition and survival, but one of shared history and intertwined destinies. The Neanderthals were not an alien species that came before us and disappeared into obscurity. Instead, they were part of the intricate web of human evolution, a species that lived, loved, hunted, and created, just as we do today. And in the genetic traces they left behind, we can see the echoes of their existence, reminding us that we are not as separate from them as we once thought. As we continue to explore our shared past, the story of the Neanderthal serves as a poignant reminder that the line between us and them is often blurrier than we care to admit. The Neanderthals may have disappeared as a distinct species, but their legacy lives on in us. Through their genes, their tools, and their cultural innovations, we carry their story forward into the present, a testament to the enduring connection between all humans, both past and present. In a very real sense, the Neanderthals are not gone, they are still with us, in the very genes that make us who we are. The Neanderthals, as we now know, were far more than just the early cousins of modern humans. Over the years, the archaeological evidence has painted a far more complex picture of their lives, behaviors, and interactions with their environment. These early humans were not simply primitive beings with limited cognitive abilities, they were sophisticated survivors in one of the harshest periods of Earth's history. The tools they created, their social structures, their innovations, and even their expressions of culture reveal a depth of intelligence and adaptability that we continue to uncover and appreciate. One of the more fascinating aspects of Neanderthal life is their ability to adapt to a constantly changing world. These were not just isolated, disconnected groups but people deeply embedded in the shifting ecosystems of Ice Age Europe and Asia. The tools that the Neanderthals used, for instance, provide insight into their understanding of the world around them. Their skill in making and using stone tools, particularly the Mysterian tool industry, was a remarkable achievement. The Mysterian tools were finely crafted to serve a variety of needs: tools for butchering animals, for scraping hides, for woodworking, and possibly even for symbolic expression. The precision required to make these tools speaks to a level of dexterity and foresight that challenges the traditional view of Neanderthals as brute force creatures. Their flint knapping techniques were so advanced that even modern archaeologists find it difficult to replicate them with the same level of effectiveness. The range of tools they created suggests a people who not only understood the materials they worked with but who also had a sense of planning and purpose. In addition to their tools, Neanderthals demonstrated an impressive understanding of the environment in which they lived. These were not simply creatures living in survival mode, they were keenly aware of their surroundings and adapted accordingly. The climate of Ice Age Europe presented numerous challenges: freezing temperatures, glacial advances and retreats, the shifting habitats of large animals, and the sudden scarcity of food sources. Yet the Neanderthals managed to not only survive but to thrive in this environment. Their thick, stocky bodies, with shorter limbs and a wide pelvis, were perfectly suited for conserving heat in the icy temperatures of northern Europe. They were also formidable hunters, capable of taking down large game such as mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and bison. Their hunting techniques, combined with their strong and muscular physiques, allowed them to overcome some of the most dangerous creatures of their time. Their mastery of fire further underscores their ability to adapt to their environment. Evidence of controlled fire use in Neanderthal campsites is abundant. The presence of hearths and fire pits at Neanderthal sites indicates that they knew how to create and maintain fire, using it for warmth, cooking, and even social purposes. The discovery of burned animal bones, charred plant material, and fire-cracked stones suggests that Neanderthals cooked their food, making it more digestible and nutritious. Fire would have been essential for survival in the harsh, cold climates in which they lived, offering warmth during frigid nights and protection from predators. The ability to cook food also marks a significant step in the development of human culture, allowing for the consumption of a wider range of foods and the development of socialization around communal meals. But Neanderthals did not just survive in their environments, they were also capable of modifying those environments to meet their needs. The shelters they built were sophisticated and suited to the conditions in which they lived. Evidence shows that Neanderthals built structures out of wood, bones, and animal hides, creating temporary or semi-permanent dwellings in caves or open-air sites. These shelters were designed to offer protection from the elements, including the cold, wind, and rain. The remains of these shelters also suggest that Neanderthals were capable of organizing their resources and planning for long-term survival. They were not nomadic in the sense that they wandered aimlessly, they moved strategically, following animal migrations or taking advantage of seasonal shifts in the availability of food sources. One of the most compelling aspects of Neanderthal life, however, is their social structure. The traditional view of Neanderthals as solitary hunters and individuals has long been overturned. The evidence suggests that Neanderthals lived in close-knit family or community groups. Fossilized remains of individuals show signs of long-term care, suggesting that Neanderthals cared for the elderly and injured members of their groups. Some Neanderthal skeletons show evidence of healed fractures or amputations, indicating that individuals who were injured in accidents or during hunting were not left to die but were supported by others. This kind of social care speaks to a level of empathy and cooperation that was once thought to be unique to Homo sapiens. In addition to their care for the sick and elderly, Neanderthal communities also appear to have shared resources. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals engaged in cooperative hunting and food sharing, indicating that they understood the value of working together to ensure the survival of the group. This social cooperation would have been crucial for survival in the harsh, unpredictable environment of the Ice Age. The fact that Neanderthals worked together so closely would have also fostered a sense of shared identity and belonging, creating bonds that were essential for maintaining social cohesion. Their ability to interact socially is also reflected in their burial practices. The discovery of Neanderthal burials has provided some of the most powerful evidence of their cognitive and emotional lives. At various Neanderthal sites, researchers have uncovered graves where individuals were carefully buried, sometimes with tools, animal bones, or other objects placed alongside the body. This suggests that Neanderthals had a concept of death and possibly even some form of ritual associated with burial. The act of burying the dead, often in specific positions and locations, could imply a belief in the afterlife or a desire to honor the deceased, marking an important step in the development of symbolic thinking. The role of art in Neanderthal society has also been a subject of considerable interest. For many years, it was believed that only Homo sapiens created art, such as cave paintings and carvings. However, evidence now suggests that Neanderthals were also capable of creating symbolic art. In several Neanderthal caves, researchers have found simple carvings and engravings on bones and stones. In some caves, there are handprints or geometric shapes that seem to have been made intentionally. While these are not as complex as the art produced by early Homo sapiens, they suggest that Neanderthals were capable of abstract thinking and creative expression. The use of symbols and marks on objects challenges the once prevailing view that Neanderthals were merely utilitarian in their thinking, incapable of engaging in the kinds of abstract thought that are typically associated with art and culture. The question of language remains central to the debate about Neanderthal culture and cognition. While there is still no direct evidence of Neanderthal speech, anatomical studies of their vocal apparatus and brain suggest that they may have been capable of speech, though possibly less complex than that of Homo sapiens. The discovery of Neanderthal genes associated with speech and language further supports the possibility that they could communicate in some form. Whether their communication was as advanced as our own is difficult to determine, but it seems clear that Neanderthals were capable of expressing ideas and emotions in ways that allowed them to function in complex social groups. They likely used a combination of vocalizations, gestures, and facial expressions to convey meaning, much as modern humans do. Despite the many similarities between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, there were important differences that set them apart. Neanderthals had smaller, less flexible social structures than Homo sapiens, and their tools and technology, while sophisticated, were not as varied or specialized as those developed by early modern humans. Neanderthals also seem to have lacked some of the cognitive abilities that were present in Homo sapiens, such as the ability to plan for the distant future or engage in long-term cultural development. These differences likely played a role in their eventual extinction, as Homo sapiens, with their more advanced social and technological strategies, were better able to adapt to changing environmental conditions and exploit new opportunities. Nevertheless, the Neanderthals were not failures. They were not just survivors of their time, they were a testament to the adaptability and resilience of humanity in the face of an unpredictable and ever-changing world. They lived in a world of extremes, where the landscape itself seemed to conspire against them, yet they carved out a way of life that allowed them to endure for hundreds of thousands of years. In many ways, their story is a reflection of the broader human story, a story of survival, creativity, and adaptation, marked by the challenges of living in a harsh world and the ingenuity required to overcome them. The Neanderthals, long considered a distinct and separate species from Homo sapiens, are now understood to have been much more intertwined with our own evolutionary history than previously thought. For many years, the conventional wisdom held that the Neanderthals were an evolutionary dead end, a species that, despite their many similarities to Homo sapiens, ultimately failed to survive due to their inability to adapt or compete with modern humans. However, as new evidence emerges from archaeological, genetic, and fossil research, it becomes increasingly clear that the story of the Neanderthals is far more complex. They did not simply disappear in the face of competition, they were integrated into the very fabric of our species' evolution in ways that we are only beginning to understand. At the heart of this reassessment is the discovery that Neanderthals were not entirely replaced by Homo sapiens but were absorbed, in part, through interbreeding. The idea that early modern humans and Neanderthals coexisted and interacted in meaningful ways has reshaped our understanding of human evolution. This intermingling of genes is not just a footnote to the story of human prehistory, it is a key chapter that speaks to the complex and often intertwined nature of human ancestry. The evidence of interbreeding comes primarily from genetic research. Sequencing the Neanderthal genome has allowed scientists to compare the DNA of modern humans with that of Neanderthals, revealing that non-African populations carry between 1 to 2 of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. This was an astonishing discovery, as it suggested that the two species not only coexisted for thousands of years but also exchanged genetic material. For a long time, it was assumed that Homo sapiens had completely replaced the Neanderthals, but the genetic evidence paints a different picture, one of blending and interaction rather than total displacement. This genetic contribution from Neanderthals is not just a random trace. It influences several aspects of modern human biology, from immune system responses to susceptibility to certain diseases. Some of the Neanderthal genes that have been preserved in modern humans are associated with immunity, helping our ancestors fight off the diseases that were present in the environment. However, these same genes have also been linked to conditions such as allergies, autoimmune diseases, and even certain forms of depression. This duality speaks to the complexity of genetic inheritance. While some of the Neanderthal traits were advantageous, others may have contributed to vulnerabilities in the modern human population. The question, then, becomes not whether Neanderthals were completely outcompete, but whether their integration into the Homo sapiens gene pool was a form of evolution in its own right, a way of blending strengths and weaknesses for survival. It is crucial to recognize that Neanderthal genes are not only present in the genomes of modern humans but have also had a profound impact on our behavior and cognition. For example, the same gene associated with speech in Homo sapiens, FOXP2, has also been found in Neanderthals. This suggests that Neanderthals may have been capable of speech, though perhaps not in the same way that Homo sapiens communicate. This genetic overlap offers tantalizing clues into the cognitive capabilities of Neanderthals, pointing to the possibility that their capacity for language, while not as advanced as ours, may have been far more sophisticated than previously assumed. This makes sense when considering their complex social structures, cooperative hunting, and the care they provided for the sick and elderly, practices that would have required some form of communication, whether through speech or other means. Neanderthal contributions to modern humans are not limited to just physical traits or cognitive abilities. Research has shown that some of the genetic material passed down from Neanderthals has been linked to behaviors such as risk-taking, aggression, and even addiction. This suggests that Neanderthals may have influenced not only our bodies and minds but also some of the social and behavioral traits that define us as a species. It is possible that early Homo sapiens inherited not only their physical characteristics but also certain tendencies from their Neanderthal cousins, traits that might have helped early human populations adapt and survive in the challenging environments of Ice Age Europe. While interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens is a significant aspect of their legacy, it is also essential to acknowledge the cultural exchanges that may have taken place between the two species. Neanderthals are now known to have created art, crafted tools, and engaged in symbolic behavior, just as Homo sapiens did. The discovery of Neanderthal cave art and carvings on bone and stone suggests that they were not the simple, brutish beings once depicted in popular media, but capable of abstract thought and creativity. Evidence of their symbolic thinking has prompted researchers to re-examine the cultural exchanges that may have occurred between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. It is likely that Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens shared knowledge about their environments, hunting techniques, and social structures. The two species lived in the same general areas and would have interacted with one another, both in peaceful exchanges and in competition. It is possible that Homo sapiens learned from Neanderthals, adopting some of their survival strategies, while the Neanderthals, in turn, may have been influenced by the more advanced tools and technologies of Homo sapiens. The overlapping of these two cultures, with their distinct yet similar ways of life, would have created a dynamic and complex exchange of ideas, practices, and innovations. Despite the apparent interactions between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, the question remains, why did the Neanderthals disappear? While the idea of competition has long been the dominant theory, recent studies suggest that the disappearance of the Neanderthals may have been more gradual and complex. Rather than a sudden extinction event brought about by the arrival of Homo sapiens, it seems likely that Neanderthals were gradually absorbed into the growing Homo sapiens population through interbreeding. This process of assimilation, rather than annihilation, suggests that the Neanderthals were not simply wiped out but rather integrated into the broader human population. The end of the Neanderthals, therefore, was not a singular event but a process that unfolded over thousands of years. As Homo sapiens spread across Europe and Asia, they encountered Neanderthal populations living in isolated regions. Over time, these Neanderthal groups may have dwindled in number due to factors such as climate change, the loss of large game species, and possibly even disease. With limited genetic diversity and a reduced ability to adapt to changing environments, the Neanderthals were gradually absorbed by the more adaptable and numerically superior Homo sapiens. The eventual absorption of the Neanderthals into the Homo sapiens gene pool is an essential aspect of understanding human evolution. Far from being a simple story of competition and replacement, the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens was one of integration, exchange, and mutual influence. The Neanderthals were not erased from history but left a lasting genetic and cultural legacy that continues to shape us today. By studying the genetic traces of Neanderthal ancestry in modern humans, we are reminded that our evolution was not a straightforward progression but a complex web of interactions between different species, all contributing to the multifaceted nature of our existence. Ultimately, the legacy of the Neanderthals is not one of extinction, but of integration. Their genes, their culture, and their survival strategies were absorbed into the very foundation of what it means to be human. The Neanderthals were not simply a failed branch of the human family tree, they were an essential part of our evolutionary journey. Through the interplay of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, we have inherited not just physical traits but aspects of our cognition, culture, and behavior that continue to define us today. The Neanderthals may have disappeared as a distinct species, but their impact on our genetics, our history, and our understanding of what it means to be human endures. The tale of the Neanderthals, from their emergence to their eventual disappearance, is a fascinating chapter in the broader story of human evolution. While their physical and genetic legacy continues to influence us today, understanding the broader context of their existence offers valuable insights not only into our own history but also into the processes that have shaped humanity as a whole. One of the most important aspects of this story is the role of environmental and ecological factors in the survival and extinction of the Neanderthals. The changing climate, shifting landscapes, and fluctuating resources all played critical roles in shaping their way of life and their eventual fate. But it was not just the external pressures of their environment that determined their course, it was the interaction between these pressures and their ability to adapt, innovate, and collaborate that ultimately decided whether they would endure. The environment in which the Neanderthals lived was vastly different from the one Homo sapiens experienced. For much of their existence, Neanderthals inhabited a world dominated by Ice Age conditions, an era marked by dramatic fluctuations in climate, the growth and retreat of glaciers, and periods of severe cold. Europe, where Neanderthals were most prevalent, was a land largely covered by ice and tundra, with only pockets of habitable land in which these early humans could thrive. The landscape was rugged and harsh, and the megafauna, such as mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and bison, were both a source of food and a constant challenge for survival. The Neanderthals' robust bodies, with their short limbs, wide ribcages, and large nasal passages, were perfectly suited to this environment. Their physiology was designed to conserve heat, enabling them to survive the freezing temperatures that many other species could not. However, despite these physical advantages, the Neanderthal survival was far from guaranteed. The end of the Ice Age, which began around 15,000 years ago, brought dramatic shifts to the environment. The glaciers retreated, and the once frozen landscape slowly transformed into temperate forests, grasslands, and wetlands. This warming trend changed the ecology of Europe and Asia in profound ways. The large herbivores that Neanderthals had relied on for food, such as mammoths and rhinoceroses, began to disappear, either due to hunting pressures, changes in vegetation, or the shifting climate. The megafauna, in turn, were replaced by smaller animals and more diverse plant life. The abundance of large game, which had been a cornerstone of Neanderthal survival, was suddenly less accessible, and Neanderthals were faced with the challenge of adapting to a rapidly changing ecosystem. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, were more adaptable to these new environments. Unlike the Neanderthals, Homo sapiens were not as heavily specialized for cold climates and had developed a broader diet, relying not only on large game but also on a diverse array of plants, smaller animals, and even fish. This dietary flexibility allowed Homo sapiens to thrive in a variety of environments, from the temperate forests of Europe to the savannas of Africa. While Neanderthals had evolved in a more specialized way to hunt and survive in cold conditions, Homo sapiens' ability to diversify their diet and adapt to a wider range of environments provided them with a significant advantage as the landscape transformed. The Neanderthals' more rigid hunting and dietary habits may have made it harder for them to cope with the rapidly changing world around them. The end of the Ice Age was not the only environmental challenge the Neanderthals faced. As the Earth's climate fluctuated, it is likely that the Neanderthals experienced numerous periods of environmental stress, such as droughts, extreme cold, and food scarcity. These climatic shifts would have forced them to adjust their way of life, and, in some cases, it is possible that they were unable to adapt quickly enough to survive. The harshness of the environment during the Ice Age likely led to periods of isolation, where Neanderthal populations became scattered and fragmented. These isolated groups, separated by vast expanses of ice and frozen land, may have been more vulnerable to environmental pressures and had a reduced ability to recover from population declines. While these environmental pressures were undoubtedly significant, the question of why the Neanderthals disappeared is not just a matter of environmental changes. The introduction of Homo sapiens into Europe and their interactions with the Neanderthals also played a central role in the Neanderthals' fate. For years, the prevailing theory was that Homo sapiens outcompete Neanderthals for resources and territory, leading to their eventual extinction. The idea that Homo sapiens were simply more advanced, with superior tools, social structures, and cultural innovations, is an attractive narrative. After all, Homo sapiens had developed more complex technologies, such as the bow and arrow, and had sophisticated social organizations that may have allowed them to hunt more efficiently and protect their communities more effectively. However, more recent research has suggested that the relationship between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals was far more complicated. While competition for resources was certainly a factor, it is increasingly clear that the two species coexisted for thousands of years, with some level of interaction, ranging from peaceful exchange to outright conflict. Evidence of cultural exchanges, such as the sharing of tools and hunting techniques, suggests that the two species were capable of learning from each other. At the same time, there is also evidence of direct competition for food and shelter, as well as the possibility that Homo sapiens may have had an advantage in terms of population size, social organization, and technological innovation. In addition to competition, there is a growing body of evidence that suggests that diseases brought by Homo sapiens may have played a role in the demise of the Neanderthals. Modern humans, as they migrated out of Africa, carried with them not only their culture and technologies but also the pathogens that had co-evolved with them. These diseases, to which Homo sapiens had developed some degree of immunity, would have been new and potentially deadly to the isolated Neanderthal populations. Without the benefit of a long history of exposure to these pathogens, Neanderthals may have been highly susceptible to epidemics, which could have caused significant population declines. Furthermore, the social structures of Neanderthals may have made them more vulnerable in the face of environmental and demographic pressures. Unlike Homo sapiens, whose larger and more interconnected social groups allowed for the sharing of resources, knowledge, and protection, Neanderthal groups may have been smaller and more isolated. This could have limited their ability to adapt to changing conditions, such as food scarcity or climatic shifts, and made them more susceptible to internal pressures, such as inbreeding or social fragmentation. The lack of a large, cohesive social network may have contributed to their gradual decline, as smaller, less resilient groups struggled to survive in a world that was changing faster than they could adapt. Yet, it is important to note that the Neanderthals were not simply a victim of circumstances. They were survivors in their own right, able to thrive in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Their physical adaptations, such as their stocky build, large nasal passages, and powerful muscles, allowed them to endure the extreme cold of Ice Age Europe. Their ability to create tools, use fire, and hunt large game speaks to their ingenuity and resourcefulness. It is also possible that the Neanderthals were more flexible than we once believed, adapting to changing climates and ecosystems in ways that we have only recently begun to understand. In the end, the Neanderthals' extinction was not the result of a single factor but a combination of environmental, ecological, and social pressures. Their decline was likely gradual, driven by the challenges of an ever-changing world and the competition with a more adaptable and socially cohesive species, Homo sapiens. However, even as they faded from the scene, the Neanderthals left an indelible mark on human evolution. The traces of their genetic material in modern humans, their cultural innovations, and their survival strategies remind us that they were not an evolutionary failure but an essential part of the human story. Their extinction, in some ways, was a necessary step in the evolution of Homo sapiens, but it also serves as a reminder that survival in an ever-changing world is never guaranteed. The Neanderthals, like all species, were shaped by the forces of nature, but they also shaped us, through their genes, their tools, and the knowledge they passed on. Their legacy endures, not just in the fragments of their bones and artifacts, but in the very DNA that courses through our veins today. The disappearance of the Neanderthals has long captivated the minds of anthropologists, historians, and even the general public. For years, their extinction was seen as a straightforward process. Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, displaced the Neanderthals, and ultimately wiped them out. This narrative, however, has undergone a significant transformation in recent decades, driven by advancements in genetics, archaeology, and a deeper understanding of human evolution. The question of why Neanderthals disappeared has now become one of the most debated topics in the study of human prehistory. Was it due to competition with Homo sapiens? Environmental changes? Disease? Or was it a combination of all these factors, woven together over thousands of years, that led to their gradual demise? One of the most significant revelations in recent years has been the discovery that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did not merely coexist for a brief period but interacted in complex and multifaceted ways for thousands of years. The idea that Neanderthals were entirely replaced by Homo sapiens, without any cultural or genetic exchange, has been debunked by mounting evidence of interbreeding. Genetic studies have shown that all non-African populations today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, a reminder that these two species were not entirely separate and distinct. The idea that Neanderthals were completely wiped out by the arrival of Homo sapiens is now considered an oversimplification, and their story is far more entangled with our own than we once thought. This genetic legacy speaks volumes about the relationship between the two species. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, although separate species, shared a common ancestor and likely encountered one another in a variety of ways, from peaceful exchanges to possibly even conflict. Fossil evidence and genetic data suggest that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted for thousands of years in overlapping regions of Europe and Asia, and there is growing evidence that these interactions were not solely limited to competition for resources but may have included interbreeding and cultural exchange as well. The Neanderthals' genetic contribution to modern humans, albeit small, has shaped many aspects of our biology, from immune responses to skin pigmentation, and serves as a reminder of how deeply intertwined their existence was with our own evolutionary trajectory. The relationship between the two species was likely complex and dynamic, with moments of cooperation as well as competition. Both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were adept hunters and foragers, and their strategies for survival may have overlapped to some extent. However, as Homo sapiens began to develop more sophisticated tools, social structures, and hunting techniques, they may have gained an advantage in terms of resource acquisition. This technological edge, coupled with a broader range of dietary options and more flexible social structures, likely allowed Homo sapiens to outcompete Neanderthals in certain environments. The ability to adapt to new and changing environments was one of the key strengths of Homo sapiens, which enabled them to thrive in a variety of ecosystems, from the frozen tundras of northern Europe to the tropical climates of Africa. Neanderthals, on the other hand, were more specialized for cold climates and had a narrower range of dietary options. While their physical adaptations allowed them to endure the harsh conditions of the Ice Age, their reliance on large game and their limited ability to adapt to a changing environment may have made them more vulnerable to ecological shifts. The retreat of the glaciers at the end of the Ice Age, which brought warmer temperatures and the rise of new ecosystems, may have contributed to the decline of the Neanderthals. As the megafauna that Neanderthals relied on for food began to disappear, the Neanderthals' more specialized hunting strategies may have become less effective, while Homo sapiens, with their broader and more diverse diet, were better positioned to thrive in the changing world. Climate change played a significant role in shaping the fate of the Neanderthals. The Ice Age, with its fluctuating temperatures and unpredictable weather patterns, created an environment that demanded constant adaptation. The Neanderthals' thick bodies, short limbs, and large nasal passages were ideally suited for the cold, but as the climate warmed and ecosystems shifted, their specialized adaptations may have become a disadvantage. In contrast, Homo sapiens, with their greater flexibility in terms of diet and social structures, may have had an easier time adapting to the changing conditions. The end of the Ice Age brought new challenges, but it also provided opportunities for those species that were able to adapt to the warmer climate. Homo sapiens, with their more diverse hunting strategies and ability to exploit a wider range of resources, were better suited to the new world that was emerging. Another key factor in the Neanderthals' disappearance is the possibility of disease transmission. When Homo sapiens first began to migrate out of Africa and encounter other hominin species, they would have brought with them not only their cultural knowledge and tools but also the pathogens they had developed immunity to. These diseases, including viruses and bacteria, could have been deadly to the isolated Neanderthal populations, who had not had the same long history of exposure to these pathogens. While Homo sapiens may have been immune or resistant to many of these diseases, the Neanderthals, with their smaller and more isolated populations, may have been more vulnerable. The impact of disease on the Neanderthal population could have been devastating, leading to significant declines in their numbers and further complicating their ability to survive in an increasingly competitive world. The process of assimilation, rather than outright extinction, seems to have been a significant aspect of the Neanderthal story. The genetic evidence shows that, rather than being completely replaced, the Neanderthals were absorbed into the Homo sapiens gene pool through interbreeding. This process of genetic assimilation would have occurred gradually over thousands of years, as Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interacted, competed, and interbred. While the Neanderthal population may have dwindled over time, their genes persisted in the modern human population, with Neanderthal DNA still detectable in the genomes of people today. This suggests that, rather than being eradicated, the Neanderthals were integrated into the larger human population, their genetic contributions forming an enduring part of the human legacy. This concept of genetic assimilation challenges the traditional view of extinction as a sudden and complete process. Instead, it paints a picture of a slow and gradual blending of two species over time, where the Neanderthals were absorbed rather than eradicated. It is a process that speaks to the complexity of human evolution, where survival is not always a matter of outcompeting others but also of integrating and adapting to new environments, new ideas, and new ways of life. The Neanderthals may have been absorbed into the human population, but their cultural and genetic legacy remains a vital part of our story. While the disappearance of the Neanderthals remains a subject of intense debate, it is clear that their extinction was not the result of a single factor but a combination of elements that worked together over time. The changing climate, the rise of Homo sapiens, the competition for resources, and the potential impact of disease all played roles in shaping the fate of the Neanderthals. Yet, despite their eventual disappearance as a distinct species, the Neanderthals left an indelible mark on the history of humanity. Their genetic contributions continue to shape us today, their cultural innovations continue to influence our understanding of human evolution, and their resilience in the face of a constantly changing world serves as a testament to their adaptability and survival instincts. The legacy of the Neanderthals is not one of failure but of integration, resilience, and adaptability. Their story is far more complex than the simple narrative of extinction, and as we continue to explore their genetics, their culture, and their interactions with Homo sapiens, we come to a deeper understanding of our shared human history. The Neanderthals may no longer walk the earth, but their legacy lives on in each of us, in the very DNA that makes us who we are. They are not gone, they are still here, in ways we are only beginning to understand. The Neanderthal story, far from being a tale of extinction, is a reminder of the complex, interconnected, and often mysterious paths that have led us to where we are today. The extinction of the Neanderthals has long been a subject of intrigue and speculation, one that forces us to grapple with the complexity of our evolutionary past. For years, scholars debated various theories, ranging from direct competition with Homo sapiens to environmental factors, disease, and even internal social structures. However, it is only through recent advances in genetics, archaeology, and interdisciplinary studies that we have started to piece together a more nuanced picture of the Neanderthals' decline. It seems now that their disappearance was not the result of a single cause, but rather a combination of factors that unfolded over millennia, leading to their gradual assimilation into the human population or, as some might argue, to their absorption. In the years following the first discoveries of Neanderthal fossils in the 19th century, they were largely perceived as brutish, primitive ancestors, more animal than human. Early reconstructions of their image, based on fragmentary remains, often depicted them as hunched, brutish figures with little more than basic instincts. Over time, however, as new fossil evidence emerged, it became clear that these early humans were far more sophisticated than initially imagined. They were skilled toolmakers, capable hunters, and, importantly, had complex social structures. Their ability to craft tools, use fire, and hunt large game such as mammoths and rhinoceroses revealed not just survival skills but a deep understanding of the natural world around them. Furthermore, evidence of ritualistic behaviors, such as intentional burials and the possible creation of symbolic art, suggests that Neanderthals had emotional and cognitive depth, challenging the notion that they were simple or primitive. Yet, despite these capabilities, the Neanderthals ultimately disappeared. Their extinction is often framed within the context of the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe. It has traditionally been assumed that our ancestors, with their more advanced technologies, social structures, and cultural practices, outcompete the Neanderthals for resources, pushing them to the brink of extinction. While this theory still holds some merit, recent evidence suggests that the relationship between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals was far more intricate than simple competition. In fact, it now seems that the two species coexisted for thousands of years, with Homo sapiens occasionally interbreeding with Neanderthals rather than fully replacing them. This intermingling has left an indelible mark on the genetic makeup of modern humans. Studies show that non-African populations today carry traces of Neanderthal DNA, about 1 to 2 of the human genome, a reminder of our shared history. This genetic legacy has deepened our understanding of the Neanderthals, offering insights into not just our shared ancestry, but also how their genetic material contributed to various aspects of modern human biology. Some of these inherited traits have been linked to immunity, skin pigmentation, and even some behavioral tendencies. The Neanderthals' capacity to adapt to their environment, as evidenced by their survival in the frigid climates of Ice Age Europe, may have provided them with valuable genetic traits that helped early Homo sapiens endure the harsh conditions they encountered during their migration out of Africa. For example, some of the immune system genes that were passed down through Neanderthal interbreeding have been shown to help modern humans fight off certain diseases. On the other hand, some of the genetic remnants from the Neanderthals are associated with health conditions, such as autoimmune diseases or depression, further complicating the legacy of this extinct species. While the Neanderthals' genetic contributions are undeniable, their eventual disappearance cannot be fully explained by genetic integration alone. Environmental factors played a significant role in shaping their fate. The Ice Age, which spanned much of the Neanderthals' existence, created a harsh and volatile environment. Periods of glaciation, followed by warmer interglacial phases, constantly reshaped the landscape and ecosystems. During the coldest periods, Europe was dominated by vast ice sheets, and only small patches of habitable land remained. Neanderthals, with their robust physiques and specialized adaptations, were well equipped to survive in these frigid conditions. Their stocky builds, large noses, and powerful musculature made them ideal for the cold, conserving heat and protecting against frostbite. But as the climate warmed and the glaciers retreated, the landscape changed, and with it, the availability of resources. The once abundant megafauna, such as mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant deer, began to dwindle. As the climate shifted, so too did the vegetation and the types of animals available for hunting. This ecological shift put pressure on the Neanderthals. While they were highly specialized for hunting large game, their ability to adapt to a changing environment was limited. The smaller, more agile prey that replaced the megafauna may have been harder to catch or less nutritionally dense, requiring more complex hunting strategies or a broader dietary flexibility. The Neanderthals, whose diets had traditionally relied heavily on large herbivores, were likely less equipped to exploit these new food sources compared to Homo sapiens, who had a more diverse range of dietary habits. Homo sapiens were able to take advantage of a broader array of animals and plants, and their ability to fish, forage for nuts, berries, and tubers, and even process plant materials for nourishment gave them an edge in adapting to a world that was changing rapidly. However, it was not just the availability of resources that posed a challenge to the Neanderthals. Their social structures and group dynamics were also a factor in their decline. Neanderthals, while clearly capable of cooperative hunting, tool-making, and social care, may have had more rigid social structures than Homo sapiens. Evidence of the care given to injured or elderly Neanderthals suggests that they had strong familial or communal ties. However, their relatively smaller group sizes and limited social networks may have made them more vulnerable in times of stress. In contrast, Homo sapiens, with their larger and more complex social structures, could share resources more efficiently, create alliances, and build more sophisticated shelters, which would have offered greater protection during difficult times. The ability to coordinate group activities, such as collective hunting and long-distance migration, likely gave Homo sapiens a survival advantage when resources became scarce. At the same time, disease may have played an underappreciated role in the Neanderthals' extinction. When Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa and began to encounter other hominin populations, they brought with them not only their tools and culture but also pathogens. The Neanderthals, with their isolated populations, would have had little immunity to the diseases carried by Homo sapiens. The resulting epidemics could have devastated Neanderthal populations, particularly if they were already weakened by climate change or resource scarcity. While we cannot definitively link specific diseases to the Neanderthal decline, the possibility of disease transmission between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals remains an important factor in the broader discussion of their disappearance. The slow and gradual process of Neanderthal extinction likely involved a combination of these factors, each interacting with the others over thousands of years. Competition with Homo sapiens for resources, environmental pressures from climate change, the limitations of their social structures, and the potential impact of disease all contributed to the Neanderthals' gradual disappearance. But it is crucial to understand that this was not a sudden extinction event. It was a slow, incremental process in which Neanderthals were absorbed into the gene pool of Homo sapiens through interbreeding rather than being entirely wiped out. Rather than being erased from history, the Neanderthals live on in the genetic makeup of modern humans, a legacy that continues to shape our biology today. Their disappearance, therefore, was not an end but a transformation. The Neanderthals were not completely replaced but were instead integrated into the larger human population. Their genetic material, cultural practices, and survival strategies became part of the broader human narrative. The story of the Neanderthals is not one of failure but of adaptation and resilience in the face of an ever-changing world. Their legacy is not simply a historical footnote but a reminder of the complexity of human evolution, one in which survival is not just about competition but also about cooperation, adaptation, and the ability to integrate new ideas and experiences. The Neanderthals may no longer walk the earth, but their presence lives on in us, in the very fabric of our being, shaping who we are and where we came from. Their story is our story, a testament to the many paths that have led humanity to where we are today. The story of the Neanderthals, once seen as a cautionary tale of evolutionary failure, has undergone a remarkable transformation in our understanding. What was once thought to be a straightforward narrative of their extinction, at the hands of Homo sapiens or due to environmental pressures, has evolved into a more complex, layered story. As we delve deeper into the history of these enigmatic humans, it becomes clear that the Neanderthals were not merely victims of competition, climate change, or disease. They were also active participants in their own survival, crafting tools, innovating solutions, and adapting to the challenges of their world in ways that are only now coming to light. The traditional view of Neanderthals, as brutish and technologically inferior beings, has been largely dispelled by recent research. The idea that Homo sapiens were the sole creators of complex tools, art, and culture has been fundamentally challenged. Neanderthals, far from being simple survivors, were capable of creating sophisticated tools, using fire to cook and keep warm, and even creating symbolic art, such as cave paintings and carvings. The discovery of these cultural artifacts has shifted our understanding of Neanderthal cognition and creativity, suggesting that they were not as primitive as once thought. Evidence of Neanderthal tool-making skills has shown that they were capable of crafting highly specialized tools, such as finely crafted spear points, scrapers, and blades, all designed to help them survive in a harsh, Ice Age environment. Their ability to adapt to these extreme conditions, particularly in the face of fluctuating climates and shifting ecosystems, speaks to their resilience and ingenuity. Unlike Homo sapiens, who were more generalized in their tool use and dietary habits, Neanderthals were highly specialized for survival in cold environments. Their stocky bodies and large nasal passages were suited for conserving heat, while their muscular builds allowed them to hunt large, dangerous prey. They mastered the use of stone tools and weapons, which enabled them to hunt megafauna like mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and bison. Yet, as the climate shifted and the Ice Age came to an end, these once valuable survival strategies became less effective. The end of the Ice Age, around 12,000 years ago, was one of the most significant turning points in Neanderthal history. With the warming climate came a dramatic change in ecosystems. The large game that Neanderthals had hunted for millennia began to decline or migrate away. The open, frozen landscapes of Europe were replaced by temperate forests and grasslands, which changed the availability of both food and shelter. For Homo sapiens, this transformation presented an opportunity, one they could adapt to due to their more flexible social structures, wider dietary range, and advanced tools for hunting smaller game and exploiting plant resources. Neanderthals, with their more specialized hunting techniques and reliance on large animals, found themselves increasingly at a disadvantage in this new environment. However, it would be a mistake to assume that Neanderthals were purely passive in the face of these challenges. Evidence suggests that they did not simply fade away but struggled to adapt, sometimes successfully. They did, after all, survive through multiple ice age cycles, demonstrating a remarkable ability to live in some of the harshest environments the Earth has ever seen. Archaeological sites show evidence of Neanderthals shifting their hunting strategies, moving into new territories, and even making use of new materials for tools. In some cases, they may have even adapted to hunting smaller game and foraging for plant-based foods, expanding their diet in response to the changing environment. This shift in behavior, however, may not have been enough to guarantee their survival. As Homo sapiens expanded out of Africa and into Europe, they likely encountered Neanderthal groups already living there. For some time, these two species coexisted in overlapping territories, competing for resources and, at times, perhaps even cooperating. Genetic evidence suggests that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals did not just live alongside each other but interbred, leaving behind traces of Neanderthal DNA in the genomes of modern humans. This genetic exchange has reshaped our understanding of the Neanderthal legacy, revealing that the line between species may have been blurrier than we once thought. This interbreeding, however, was not the only way in which Homo sapiens may have impacted the Neanderthals. The arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe may have brought with it new diseases to which the Neanderthals had no immunity. Evidence of disease transmission between human populations has become an important factor in the discussion of Neanderthal extinction. As Homo sapiens migrated into Europe, they likely carried pathogens with them, viruses, bacteria, and parasites, that Neanderthals had never encountered. Without the benefit of exposure to these diseases, the Neanderthal population, already stressed by climate change and resource scarcity, could have been particularly vulnerable to new epidemics. This may have played a significant role in their eventual decline. In addition to these environmental and biological pressures, the Neanderthals also faced challenges related to their social structures. While it is clear that Neanderthals lived in social groups and cared for one another, their smaller populations and relatively isolated communities may have made them more vulnerable to external pressures. In contrast, Homo sapiens, with their larger and more interconnected social groups, may have had more resources to draw upon in times of crisis. Homo sapiens also developed more sophisticated social structures and communication systems, which allowed for more efficient cooperation and problem-solving. This, combined with their broader range of survival strategies, likely gave them a competitive edge in the struggle for resources. The Neanderthals' extinction, therefore, was not the result of a sudden event but rather a slow, gradual process driven by a variety of interconnected factors. Environmental changes, the loss of large game, and the challenges of adapting to new climates played crucial roles. So too did the arrival of Homo sapiens, whose more flexible survival strategies, broader diet, and social structures may have given them the upper hand in competing for resources. However, the Neanderthals' extinction was not a simple matter of being outcompeted by a superior species. It was a complex process, shaped by changing climates, shifting ecosystems, disease, and interbreeding. The Neanderthals did not simply vanish, they were absorbed into the human gene pool. Today, the legacy of the Neanderthals is not one of total disappearance, but of integration. Genetic studies have shown that the Neanderthals' DNA lives on in modern humans, particularly in non-African populations. As much as 2% of the genome of people of European or Asian descent can be traced back to Neanderthal ancestry, a testament to the profound impact that this extinct species has had on our evolution. Their legacy is not only a matter of genetic inheritance but also of the cultural and technological exchanges that took place between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Far from being mere competitors, the Neanderthals were partners in the shaping of modern humanity. The Neanderthals' disappearance, then, is not a story of defeat but one of transformation. They were not eradicated, rather, their genes and cultural practices were integrated into the growing human population. Through this process of absorption, the Neanderthals live on in ways we are only beginning to understand. Their cultural contributions, their survival strategies, and their genetic legacy continue to shape us today. The question of why the Neanderthals disappeared may never be fully answered, but we now understand that their extinction was not a simple matter of being outcompeted by Homo sapiens. It was a complex, multifactorial process, in which environmental, biological, and social factors all played crucial roles. The Neanderthals were not a failed branch of human evolution, they were a vital part of the story of human survival. Their lives, their struggles, and their eventual disappearance shaped the course of human history in ways that we are still unraveling. Today, as we study their genetics, their tools, and their cultural artifacts, we are reminded that the Neanderthals were not just a precursor to Homo sapiens but a species in their own right, one that contributed to the complexity of our shared evolutionary journey. In the end, their story is a testament to the resilience of life and the ever-evolving nature of human existence, a reminder that survival is never guaranteed, but through adaptation and integration, the legacy of the past endures. As we reflect on the Neanderthal story, one of the most compelling aspects of their existence is their cultural and cognitive abilities, which were far more advanced than previously thought. The common misconception that Neanderthals were little more than primitive, instinct-driven creatures has been increasingly debunked in recent decades. Instead, a growing body of evidence suggests that the Neanderthals were not only capable of creating and using tools with impressive skill, but they also demonstrated complex social behaviors, emotional depth, and cultural practices. This has profound implications for how we view their place in the human family tree. One of the most striking aspects of Neanderthal culture is their ability to craft tools. Archaeological findings show that they were not just using simple stone tools but were skilled in creating highly specialized implements. Neanderthal tools were used for a variety of tasks: hunting, skinning, butchering, and even creating other tools. Some of these tools were remarkably advanced, such as finely crafted blades and spear points, which were used for hunting large game. In fact, the Neanderthals' toolkits were so sophisticated that they rivaled those of early Homo sapiens. The level of skill required to make such tools suggests a high degree of planning and knowledge, as well as the ability to pass this knowledge down to younger generations. This is indicative of a culture that involved learning, teaching, and the transmission of skills. Beyond their toolmaking abilities, Neanderthals also demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in the use of fire. Evidence of Neanderthal-controlled fire has been found at numerous archaeological sites, suggesting that they not only used fire for warmth but also for cooking. The controlled use of fire was a significant cultural leap, providing Neanderthals with several advantages. Cooking would have allowed them to digest a wider variety of foods, breaking down tough animal fibers and making nutrients more accessible. It also protected them from predators and provided light in the darkness of long winters. In some areas, there is even evidence that Neanderthals used fire to create symbolic or decorative objects, further hinting at their cognitive and cultural sophistication. Perhaps the most striking evidence of Neanderthal cognitive abilities is their burial practices. In multiple instances, Neanderthal burial sites have been discovered where individuals were interred with care, sometimes with tools or other objects. This behavior suggests a belief in some form of ritual or reverence for the dead, a concept once thought to be uniquely human. While it is difficult to know exactly what the Neanderthals believed or whether they had a religious system, the act of intentionally burying the dead points to a level of emotional and cognitive complexity that was previously underestimated. The notion of death, and perhaps an understanding of life's impermanence, seems to have been an important part of Neanderthal social life. In some cases, Neanderthals were buried with flowers, further suggesting that they may have had an appreciation for beauty, symbolism, or the emotional significance of particular items. In addition to their toolmaking and burial practices, there is increasing evidence that Neanderthals engaged in the creation of symbolic art. While much of this evidence is still tentative, several discoveries suggest that Neanderthals might have been responsible for cave paintings and carvings. At the cave of La Paisiega in Spain, for example, symbols resembling abstract art have been found, some of which appear to date back to a time when Neanderthals were still living in the area. If these symbols were indeed created by Neanderthals, it would suggest that their cognitive abilities were more advanced than we once thought. The ability to create art, even in its simplest form, requires a level of abstract thinking and an understanding of symbolism. This could imply that Neanderthals were not only capable of planning and reasoning but were also emotionally and psychologically complex beings. Moreover, there is evidence that Neanderthals were capable of social cooperation and emotional bonding within their groups. Neanderthal communities were likely small, but they seem to have been tightly knit. Fossils of Neanderthals show evidence of individuals who had survived injuries or illnesses, implying that their groups may have cared for the sick or injured. For example, one Neanderthal individual from the Shanidar cave in Iraq shows signs of severe trauma but appears to have lived for many years afterward, suggesting that others in the group provided care and support. This is consistent with the idea that Neanderthals had complex social structures, where cooperation and mutual aid were vital for survival. Their social bonds, just like those of early Homo sapiens, would have been critical in navigating the dangers and uncertainties of life in the Ice Age. The question of whether Neanderthals had language is one of the most debated topics in the study of human evolution. While there is no direct evidence of Neanderthal speech, there are compelling arguments that suggest they may have had the ability to communicate in complex ways. Studies of Neanderthal anatomy, particularly the structure of the vocal cords and the brain areas associated with speech, suggest that they may have had a similar capacity for language as early Homo sapiens. Additionally, the complexity of their social interactions, their tool-making skills, and the potential for symbolic thinking all point to the possibility that Neanderthals had a form of communication that allowed them to convey ideas, emotions, and intentions. While their language may not have been as sophisticated as that of Homo sapiens, it likely played an important role in coordinating group activities, expressing emotions, and passing down knowledge. Even more fascinating is the possibility that Neanderthals might have had a level of emotional expression and empathy that is often attributed only to modern humans. Studies of Neanderthal remains have shown that they experienced the same physical stresses and emotional challenges that Homo sapiens did. They hunted dangerous animals, cared for injured individuals, and adapted to rapidly changing environments. It is not a stretch to imagine that their social lives were emotionally rich and complex. Just as modern humans form deep emotional bonds with family members and members of their social group, Neanderthals likely shared similar feelings of attachment, love, and care. In fact, the idea that emotions like empathy, love, and grief were part of Neanderthal life challenges the view that these early humans were emotionally rudimentary. Instead, it points to a species that was capable of deep emotional engagement with one another and their environment. Neanderthal society, however, was not without its challenges. While they displayed significant adaptability and resilience, the pressures of their changing environment, coupled with competition from other hominin species, undoubtedly took a toll on their populations. As the Ice Age ended and the climate warmed, the Neanderthals found themselves increasingly marginalized, unable to adjust as quickly or as broadly as Homo sapiens. This environmental shift, along with the intrusion of new diseases and the gradual absorption of their gene pool through interbreeding with Homo sapiens, led to the eventual extinction of the Neanderthal population. Despite their eventual disappearance, the Neanderthals have left an indelible mark on the human lineage. Far from being the primitive, brutish beings once depicted in early anthropology, they were intelligent, adaptive, and emotionally complex. Their ability to create tools, use fire, care for one another, and possibly even create art and symbolic representations reveals a species that was deeply engaged with its world. In fact, the Neanderthal legacy lives on not just in the traces of their DNA present in modern humans, but in the cultural and emotional foundations they may have helped to establish. As we continue to unravel the complexities of Neanderthal life, it becomes clear that they were not a failed evolutionary branch, but an integral part of the human story. Their extinction, while a tragic chapter, was not the end of their influence. Instead, it was a transformation that continues to resonate through the genes, cultures, and societies of Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals may no longer walk among us, but they remain, indelibly, part of who we are. The disappearance of the Neanderthals has long been one of the most poignant and enduring mysteries of human prehistory. For centuries, their fate was portrayed as a tragic yet inevitable consequence of human evolution. The prevailing narrative suggested that Neanderthals were simply outcompeted by Homo sapiens, who, with their superior tools, social structures, and cognitive abilities, eventually overshadowed their Neanderthal cousins. This view, however, has been challenged by new discoveries, which have led to a much more complex and nuanced understanding of the Neanderthal extinction. Theories about their disappearance have shifted from the simplistic idea of their replacement by Homo sapiens to a more sophisticated narrative in which the Neanderthals' fate was shaped by a combination of environmental changes, genetic assimilation, and cultural exchanges, rather than an outright competitive wipeout. Recent studies in genetics have played a crucial role in reshaping our understanding of the Neanderthal legacy. Rather than disappearing completely, it now appears that the Neanderthals were integrated into the Homo sapiens gene pool through a process of interbreeding. The notion that the Neanderthals were wholly displaced by Homo sapiens is no longer supported by scientific evidence. Instead, genetic research has revealed that modern humans, particularly those of non-African descent, carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, confirming that the two species interacted and interbred for thousands of years. This discovery has profoundly altered our perception of the Neanderthals, turning them from a distant, isolated branch of human evolution into an integral part of the human story. However, the process of genetic assimilation was not an immediate one, nor was it entirely voluntary on the part of the Neanderthals. The evidence suggests that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted in overlapping regions for thousands of years, sometimes as neighbors, at other times as competitors. The interactions between the two species were complex, and the question of whether they lived in harmony or engaged in conflict remains a matter of debate. While early theories depicted Homo sapiens as aggressive invaders who systematically eliminated the Neanderthals, the latest evidence suggests that their interactions were far more varied. There was likely a great deal of overlap in terms of behavior, including moments of cooperation, competition, and, quite possibly, moments of cultural exchange. The coexistence of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens raises fascinating questions about the nature of their relationship. Evidence of shared toolkits, similar hunting strategies, and possibly even the exchange of knowledge suggests that the two species may have influenced one another in ways that were previously unimagined. In some areas, the Neanderthals may have adopted certain cultural practices from Homo sapiens, while Homo sapiens may have learned survival strategies from the Neanderthals, particularly in adapting to cold, Ice Age environments. Some anthropologists even suggest that the Neanderthals might have been able to offer Homo sapiens insight into the types of large-game hunting practices that helped them survive in harsh climates. It is even possible that the two species formed alliances, trading goods, tools, and ideas in ways that went beyond mere competition. It is crucial to note, however, that the genetic legacy of the Neanderthals did not come without consequences. The small percentage of Neanderthal DNA present in modern humans is a testament to the interbreeding that occurred between the two species, but it also highlights the long-term biological impact of their assimilation. Some of the genetic traits inherited from the Neanderthals have proven beneficial, such as certain immune system genes that have helped modern humans fight off infections. However, some Neanderthal genes have been associated with health conditions like autoimmune diseases, depression, and other genetic disorders. This dual legacy, both beneficial and problematic, adds complexity to our understanding of the Neanderthal contribution to human biology. Despite the genetic intermingling, the disappearance of the Neanderthals as a distinct group is still one of the most profound aspects of their story. The fact that they are no longer a separate species or population is a reminder of the fragility of all species in the face of environmental, social, and ecological pressures. The Neanderthals' decline, though a slow process, speaks to the inherent vulnerability of isolated populations in times of drastic environmental change. The end of the Ice Age, with its warming temperatures and the shifting of ecosystems, played a major role in the Neanderthals' decline. The changing climate dramatically altered the availability of resources and, in turn, the Neanderthals' ability to sustain their way of life. The megafauna they relied on for food began to disappear, and new challenges arose as Homo sapiens expanded into the regions once occupied by Neanderthals. It's important to recognize that the Neanderthals were not the only hominin species to face extinction as a result of environmental changes. The end of the Ice Age marked a period of significant climate shifts that affected many species, not just the Neanderthals. While Homo sapiens managed to survive these changes through adaptability and flexibility in their social structures and survival strategies, the Neanderthals were more specialized for cold environments and may have struggled to cope with the warmer conditions. Their reliance on large game and their inability to diversify their diet quickly enough may have led to their eventual collapse. In contrast, Homo sapiens, with their broader dietary range and greater social complexity, were more able to adjust to the new climate and ecological conditions. The rise of Homo sapiens as the dominant hominin species is often framed as a result of direct competition with the Neanderthals. But this competition was not necessarily a one-sided battle. As new evidence continues to emerge, it becomes clear that the Neanderthals were not simply passive victims of Homo sapiens' expansion. Their social structures, cognitive abilities, and cultural practices suggest that they were formidable competitors in their own right. The fact that they survived for so long in the harsh conditions of the Ice Age speaks to their resilience and adaptability. Moreover, their ability to coexist with Homo sapiens for thousands of years implies that they were not easily displaced. The eventual disappearance of the Neanderthals, therefore, was not a simple case of being outcompeted by a superior species, but rather a result of a complex interplay of environmental pressures, interspecies interactions, and possibly even internal factors that influenced their ability to adapt to changing conditions. Another crucial factor in the Neanderthal extinction is the potential role of disease. As Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa and spread into regions already inhabited by Neanderthals, they would have brought with them new pathogens to which the Neanderthals had no immunity. This exchange of diseases may have had a devastating impact on Neanderthal populations, especially if they were already weakened by environmental stressors or limited genetic diversity. The introduction of new pathogens may have contributed to the decline of Neanderthal populations, further hindering their ability to survive in the changing world. Disease, in combination with competition, climate change, and other ecological factors, may have created a perfect storm that led to the Neanderthals' extinction. The final disappearance of the Neanderthals marked the end of an era in human evolution, but their legacy lives on in the genetic material passed down through modern humans. As we learn more about the Neanderthals, it becomes increasingly clear that their story is not one of failure or irrelevance but of integration, adaptation, and survival. The traces of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans are a testament to their contribution to our genetic heritage. They were not wiped from the face of the earth but were absorbed into the broader human gene pool, their legacy preserved in the very DNA of those who remain. As we reflect on the Neanderthals' disappearance, we are reminded of the ever-evolving nature of human history. Their extinction is not a story of one species triumphing over another, but a tale of environmental shifts, cultural exchanges, and the complex web of factors that shaped the trajectory of human evolution. In this light, the Neanderthals' demise is less of a tragic end and more of a transformation, one in which they became an integral part of the human legacy. Today, as we carry their genes within us, the Neanderthals are not gone, they continue to shape us, their influence ever present in the fabric of our biology, culture, and identity. Their extinction, though a pivotal moment in history, is not the end of their story, it is merely a chapter in the ongoing saga of human evolution. Section 16 Expand Crow English Ma without headings Na High Section Name AAI Na Section Number AAI 1200 plus words Ka The tale of the Neanderthals has long been one of the most captivating and debated chapters in the story of human evolution. Once considered brutish, primitive creatures, they are now understood to have been much more complex, intelligent, and capable than earlier research suggested. Their extinction, a key event in the human evolutionary timeline, invites reflection not only on the Neanderthals themselves but also on the broader forces that shape the survival of species. It raises important questions about what it takes to persist in an ever-changing world and what happens when those forces of change are too powerful to overcome. It's easy to imagine the Neanderthals as one of history's many lost species, an unfortunate byproduct of natural selection. However, more recent research paints a different picture, one that emphasizes the intricate web of interactions between Neanderthals, their environment, and Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals, rather than disappearing suddenly, faded away over thousands of years, intermingling genetically with the ancestors of modern humans and leaving behind traces of their existence in our DNA. This transition from being a distinct species to becoming a part of the human story challenges the traditional narrative of extinction. Far from being wiped out, the Neanderthals were absorbed, their genes continuing to influence the biological legacy of Homo sapiens. But what does it mean for a species to disappear in this way? What forces, both external and internal, shape the fate of a population? The story of the Neanderthals' extinction is not simply a tale of survival of the fittest. It's a story shaped by many factors: competition, environmental shifts, genetic exchange, and the very nature of how species interact with one another. It forces us to reconsider the way we think about extinction itself. Often, we imagine extinction as a violent, abrupt event. A species either survives or dies. Yet, for the Neanderthals, extinction was not so much an end as it was a gradual process of integration and transformation. When we examine the disappearance of the Neanderthals, we must first look at the environmental context in which they lived. The Neanderthals, who thrived for tens of thousands of years in the cold, harsh climates of Ice Age Europe, were incredibly well adapted to these conditions. Their stocky, muscular builds and large noses were perfect for conserving heat and enduring freezing temperatures. They hunted large game, like mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses, and made use of their environment in ways that demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the world around them. Yet, as the Earth entered a period of warming, with the Ice Age coming to a close, the environment changed dramatically. The megafauna that Neanderthals relied upon for food became scarcer, and new ecosystems emerged, offering different types of prey and resources that the Neanderthals may have been less equipped to exploit. The warming climate did not simply change the types of animals the Neanderthals hunted, it altered the very structure of the environments in which they lived. The open tundras that characterized Ice Age Europe began to give way to forests, grasslands, and eventually more temperate landscapes. The arrival of Homo sapiens, with their more varied diets and advanced survival strategies, further complicated the Neanderthals' ability to adapt. Homo sapiens, who had evolved in a different environment, brought with them new technologies and social structures. They could exploit a wider range of food sources, both plant and animal, and had a greater capacity for long-term survival in fluctuating climates. While the changing environment and the competition with Homo sapiens certainly played a role in the Neanderthals' decline, it's important not to overlook the social and genetic factors that influenced their extinction. Neanderthals, with their smaller, more isolated populations, may have faced significant challenges in maintaining genetic diversity. Isolated groups tend to have a smaller gene pool, which can lead to inbreeding and reduced adaptability. In contrast, Homo sapiens, with their larger populations and more complex social structures, were better equipped to adapt to changing conditions. Homo sapiens also developed more advanced tools, weapons, and strategies for hunting, which gave them an edge in the increasingly competitive landscapes of post-Ice Age Europe. But despite these challenges, the Neanderthals were not entirely eradicated by competition. Evidence suggests that there was considerable interaction between the two species. Far from being isolated, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived in close proximity for thousands of years, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating. The genetic evidence supports this notion of interbreeding, with studies revealing that non-African humans today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, roughly 1 to 2. This genetic legacy suggests that Neanderthals did not simply die out but were integrated into the gene pool of Homo sapiens. In a sense, the Neanderthals were not eliminated but absorbed, their genetic material woven into the fabric of our own biology. The process of interbreeding and genetic assimilation paints a more complex picture of the Neanderthals' fate. They were not an inferior species, easily vanquished by the superior Homo sapiens. Rather, they were a species capable of producing offspring with Homo sapiens. This fact speaks to the overlap between the two species in terms of cognitive abilities, social behaviors, and reproductive compatibility. It challenges the idea of a sharp, clear division between the two, suggesting that, in many ways, they were not so different from each other after all. The disappearance of the Neanderthals, then, must be seen as a gradual process rather than an abrupt event. While climate change, competition with Homo sapiens, and genetic assimilation played significant roles, it is also likely that other factors contributed to their decline. Disease may have played a part, with new pathogens introduced by Homo sapiens wreaking havoc on Neanderthal populations that had no immunity to such diseases. As Homo sapiens expanded into Europe and encountered the Neanderthals, they brought with them not only their superior technology and social structures but also the potential for disease transmission. The Neanderthals, isolated for millennia, may have been ill-prepared for the diseases carried by Homo sapiens, which could have had devastating effects on their already dwindling populations. In addition to disease, the Neanderthals' social structures and behaviors may have influenced their ability to survive. While we know that Neanderthals were capable of forming tight-knit social groups, it's unclear whether these groups were as flexible or as large as those of Homo sapiens. Larger social groups can provide greater access to resources, more cooperative strategies, and a more diverse gene pool, all of which are important factors for survival in a changing world. The Neanderthals, with their smaller, more isolated communities, may have lacked the social cohesion and adaptability that Homo sapiens possessed. Their relatively rigid social structures may have hindered their ability to cope with environmental stressors or to integrate new survival strategies.